morning, guys. Good morning, good morning. Hey, everybody watching online, it's good to see you. Hey, history loves nothing more than a dynamic duo, particularly if that duo is made up of brothers. Have you noticed this? We love a good brother story, like two brothers making the world work. I asked our staff this week, who do you think the most influential brothers in history were? I'm ashamed that every time I asked this question in different settings, there was a very clear number one. This is them right here, the number one brothers that were. And then I asked, well, what do they sing? And nobody knew. Nobody knew a single song from the Sucker is the number one answer, by the way. Really, if you think about American history, you think about world history, you think about international history, I would argue no one has had more influence over the way you live your life and get around than these brothers. Who are these brothers? The makers of popcorn is what you wanted to say. No. What did they invent? Airplane. Someone wanted to say flight, but God invented that. That's, Wright brothers. I have hopped many planes lately. Thankful for them. I never think about them, but really influential. Okay, if you think about worldwide, like real upper echelon, like most important brothers in the entire world, of course, we're talking about not the Kelsey brothers. But I'll have to skip my next slide because, thank you, that was great, wonderful. What have these guys done? Right. They're literally famous for being rich. We love the Royals here, the Kelsey brothers, that's the next one. Okay, come on, give it up for Jason and Travis. And one more year. Man, every time I see Travis running out route, I feel bad for his back. My personal favorite brothers, most influential in my life. I grew up with these brothers. They're like a part of my family, and now I've introduced my kids to these brothers. We interact with them many, many times, probably throughout the week. Obviously, I'm talking about the saviors of Princess Peach, Mario brothers, right? I mean, just so many brothers throughout history that we love. We love brothers. Brothers can make an impact. Brothers can really make the world go around. Today, what we're doing in this series called Ordinary is I actually want to introduce you to, then this is really no joke, but I wanted to put these guys that we're going to talk about today at this level with all of these famous people in our world. I think the people that we're going to talk about today, the followers of Jesus who were everyday heroes of faith, are probably the most influential brothers in history, and hardly anybody ever talks about them. I want to talk today about what Jesus dubbed. He gave them a nickname in the scriptures. They're two of his followers. They're called the Sons of Thunder. The Sons of Thunder. And I was writing this, and I couldn't help but get in like a WWE amp-up hype man kind of mode to be like weighing in at who knows how many pounds, the Sons of Thunder, and wanted you to like give it up and applaud and have them come in. But I mean, this is, it's an incredible honor to be given a nickname by Jesus, especially one that sounds awesome even in 2025. Their names were James and John. They were 2/3 of Jesus' inner circle. And in fact, Jesus called them to follow him on the heels of calling another set of brothers, Andrew and Peter. This is Mark chapter 1. It says, when Jesus had gone a little farther, immediately after calling Andrew and Peter, he saw James, the son of Zebedee. It's kind of a name you got to say out loud because it's fun. Go ahead. Zebedee. Yep, James, the son of Zebedee. We know James was older because he's attached to his father. Okay, that's kind of how the ancient world worked, so he's the older. And then his brother, so John is related to his brother. That means he's younger. John in the boat, preparing their nets. They are fishermen. Without delay, he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed Jesus. If you're familiar with the idea of a sibling rivalry, James and John should show up in your accounts of sibling rivalries somewhere. They join a long list of brothers in the Bible who have some sort of competition going on between them. They are two guys who are geared, wired, raised to compete. They are in themselves people who are out for blood sometimes. They're out to prove their worth. They're out to prove their mettle. I think if they were raised today, they would play only club sports. They would be at the gym every single day, and they'd have a dad who was yelling at them the whole time it was happening. Do you know what I'm talking about? James and John probably came from money. These are probably one of the wealthier of the disciples that followed Jesus. And the reason that we know this is because Zebedee was a well-known name in Jerusalem. He was actually well-known to the high priest. He was a connected person. He was somebody who had reputation and a way about him that connected him with the who's who of society. They probably were given a fishing boat from their dad years before other boys had fishing boats. You know what I mean? They were being taught how to run a business, how to look for advantages in life. That's why this one detail that Mark includes, that they left their father and the hired men in the boat to follow Jesus. It's an important detail because they were people who were learning not just how to do the job, but do the job in an enterprise sort of way that could maximize their profits. Zebedee was doing what I think every single one of us dads wants to do with our kids, which is to create winners. They were winners. They were built to be winners. If I think about a fictitious but true group of people, do you remember the movie The Social Network? It's kind of old now, but it's about Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and the Facebook and all that stuff. There's a set of brothers called the Winklevoss twins. Do you know them? I knew this was too obscure. I knew it. Google it later. But they're like the J. Crew and the yacht kind of people. This is James and John in my mind, right? Rich dad, kind of out to win the world. And we kind of get a sense of who James and John are and what their ordinary life is like if we look at one core story from their experience. It kind of cuts across the field of their lives pretty quickly to show us what was going on in their hearts. So I want to bring us to it. It's found in Matthew chapters 19 and 20. Matthew's chapter 19 and 20. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. It's towards the last week of his life where he is going to do what we call his work. He's going to do his work. Now, in the scriptures, whenever you hear Jesus talk about his work, that is a direct reference to his messianic mission. His call by God, being sent by God to give up his life as a ransom for many. His work is always the work he does on the cross in paying the penalty for our sins, and then rising from the dead to provide new life to those who are caught in the power of sin. Right? So this is what we call the work. Jesus is going up to do the thing that he has come to. And he's telling his disciples to try and get them up to speed on all that is about to happen because it's going to be a little bit weird for them. It's going to be pressure-filled. It's going to be, they're going to face obstacles. And Jesus wants them to make it through this season to see what he is really, truly building in this world. And so he tells them along the way, he tells them that he was going to Jerusalem, and he uses this phrase. He says, I'm going to build my kingdom. Matthew chapter 19, verse 28, he says, truly I tell you, at the renewal of all things, when the Son of Man sits on his glorious throne, you who followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, that's a very straight, it kind of sounds like it's ripped out of the Book of Mormon, if you know a little bit about that book. That's not a joke, but it just sounds like, there's these promises in the Book of Mormon about celestial kingdoms and you go reign and you get your own planet and all this stuff. It sounds like Jesus is saying, hey, in my day, in my age, you who follow me, who are the ground level starters, the hardcore ones, you're going to get a chance to influence the world, and we're going to do this. We're going to rule this place together. This is going to be fantastic. And listen, this was a very ordinary thought for the disciples to have because they expected the Messiah to come and launch a social and political revolution fueled by God's spiritual power. That was the expectation of the day. They were waiting for God to overthrow the Romans who had been occupying their land, bringing in all of their foreign gods, their foreign ways, waging culture wars upon the Jewish people. And they expected God to free them, to set them back, to make Israel great again, so to speak, I guess. And so this was normal. This is really normal. And in fact, they expected this because the prophets were chock full of all of these metaphors of the king that would come who would rule over the rulers of this world. What a promise to the 12 disciples. They had hedged their bets that Jesus was the Messiah, but here he is saying, not only am I going to rule and reign, but you get to join me. And I imagine James and John, their eyes kind of getting wide, kind of thinking about what it's going to be like to finally make the world listen to me, do what I say, what I want. Their minds go to that. They must have missed what Jesus said immediately following. Because 2 sentences later, this is what Jesus says. Many who are first in that day will be last, and many who are last will be first. I think they missed this part of what Jesus said because a couple verses later, if you skip to Matthew chapter 20, verse 21, Jesus has now started to climb the mountain up to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was up on a hill. It was a very paved, easy walk, but it was definitely, you're climbing a bit of an incline. And as he's going up, Matthew tells us that he stopped along the way by someone who's very important to James and to John. It's their mother, their mom. Do you know the phrase lawnmower parenting or snowblower parenting or helicopter parenting or pick your parenting motif that we've invented in the past couple of decades? This is the first ancient example of lawnmower parenting, where a mom goes in and creates space in the future for her kids by her request. She stops Jesus and she says to him, I want you to do something for me in your kingdom. And Jesus bites. He goes, okay, what is it? This is verse 21. She said, grant that one of these 2 sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom. Jesus, we hear what you're saying. We know that we're about to take over the world. We don't know how you're going to call down fire from heaven or legions of angels, but we know that you're about to set everything right for us. And you're setting up shop in the future. In your administration, I have some suggestions for the cabinet that you're starting to assemble. Could you think of anyone better than my boys? Mark, when he records this, he just says James and John told Jesus they wanted him to do something for them. Matthew, who has got the keen eye for details, the human details, he's the one that reminds us it was their mom who asked the question. And I think it perturbed Matthew because he says later on in chapter 20 that all of the disciples heard about the request and they were indignant with James and John for assuming that they would have that possibility. What were James and John's mom doing with Jesus? This kind of is like a detail that comes out of left field, and it actually tells us a lot about who they were, the type of family that they came from. We know her name. I don't know how to say her name. I've heard it 2 ways. Salome is one way to say it. Salome is the other way that Google told me to say it. I've always heard it Salome, but that's just because I'm American, and who really knows how to say Salome, Salome? She was one of the people who was at the cross and going to the empty grave. She was with Jesus the week before he was climbing up the mountain. She stopped Jesus on the road up to ask if her sons could have positions of honor in his kingdom. She was a sincere, devout Jewish believer, and she was the wife of Zebedee. She's, on her own right, pretty well respected in the annals of history. She loved her boys. She obviously wanted for them to have all the advantages in life. But it wasn't uncommon for women, especially like mothers, to go with their sons on rabbinic adventures, especially like the one Jesus had been leading, to provide sort of like support. If you've ever run an ultra marathon, you know that you need like a support team. I've never done this, I'm not crazy, but I've heard you need like people to go with you and they like walk with you for certain segments. And Jesus had a support team. He had people who came and they would provide for day-to-day practical meals. In fact, this whole series, what we've called Ordinary, is about the everyday followers of Jesus. And we're talking, and we will talk even more about people who are not just about the 12 followers of Jesus who comprised his disciple team. There was often dozens of people around Jesus who were traveling with him. And Salome would have been one of those people who just made sure that Jesus had what he needed, what was prepared in advance could be taken care of. But undoubtedly, she was sent by Zebedee with something more valuable than his sons: his money. Salome would have been one of the biggest financial backers of Jesus' ministry, paying for accommodations, paying for food, helping make sure that Jesus is well supplied. There were many people who did this, but we think that this family probably were the top donors to Jesus' ministry. And as such, doesn't it kind of ring a little bit more of an insult that she stops Jesus on his way to the cross to say, hey, in what you're about to do, don't forget what I've done for you. Can you help me by taking care of my boys in your kingdom? All of it has like the thrilling epic of a Netflix special. And this kind of reveals the secret motivations that James and John had for following Jesus. They were following him, not just because he had called them, not just because they thought that he was the Messiah, but James and John followed Jesus for a very ordinary but dishonorable reason. They're following him for what he could do for them. The right and the left hand were positions of honor and power. They weren't asking to be Jesus. They realized that only Jesus was Jesus. They just wanted to be influential to Jesus. They wanted to be in the throne room where it happens, to borrow a line from Hamilton. They wanted to make it happen. And I think it would be really easy for you and me to look down our noses at these two young men, their mom, their dad, and condemn them. Sort of like what a power play, like how inappropriate in the realm of what God was doing in human history and for our spiritual lives and for even like caring for the weak and the poor and the disenfranchised. Like how could they be so selfish? But I think there's no more, for me, relatable characters in the story of the Gospels than James and John. In fact, if there ever existed a like which disciple are you test, there's like which friend's character are you, like all those things. You used to take these surveys on Facebook. You know, this was back in the day. If there was a what disciple are you, I would be both James and John. And I think their ordinary tension is very hard for me to admit that I have the same one. I even think that sometimes this is really hard for us to perceive in our own lives, these similarities. And I think it's because James and John ultimately represent the most common, most ordinary problem known to humankind. It's this. It's pride. James and John have a track record of being proud. This is the point in the message where I say the word pride, and you start to think, oh my gosh, why did my son not come with me today? Oh my gosh, I wish my mom was here to hear this. Oh my gosh, we're going to talk about pride today. Oh, I wish someone else, because none of us are proud. Raise your hand if you're a proud person. Right. Betrayed yourself right there. None of us think we struggle with pride because pride is one of the most difficult to perceive problems in our own heart. And yet pride is the most ubiquitous problem found in the heart of humanity. And if you're here today, you're just wondering about who Jesus is, what he's like. You know, our church is a church that invites people to come asking questions before you believe in Jesus. We want you to know, like, this is a safe place for you to come, explore the claims of Jesus, bring your curiosities, your doubts, and we want to have conversations and dialogues. A lot of what we do is just to help people discover and find God and have a way to understand the deep questions that you have, the honest questions that you have. But you might be here today and you might be like, wait a minute, you're telling me that it was a problem for them to have pride? Because our society today uses pride as an ultimate positive word, doesn't it? I mean, have pride in yourself. Something happens in our world, we go with pride. We want to have pride. For decades now, pride has become a code word for like esteem, for strength, some version of persistence and perseverance. I was introduced to a book the other day called The Way of Character. It's written by David Brooks. He cited a study from the 1950s. Here's how the study went. The researchers asked high school seniors how they perceived themselves. The question was asked, do you think you're a very important person? That was how the question was raised in the 1950s. high school seniors in the 1950s, 12% of graduating high schoolers said yes to that answer. Yes, I am a very important person. They asked the question again the year that I graduated high school. I was not asked this question. I was not a part of this study, but these are my friends, my peers, my age group. 55 years later, the question was posed the exact same way. Do you think you're a very important person? 80% of my peers said yes to that question. Something changed in the last 50 years in our own estimation of how valuable you and I are. The joke on millennials has been snowflakes, right? I mean, that was kind of our first moniker, is that you're all important, you all get a trophy, you all win at everything, even if you lost every game. Like millennial baseball would have given the White Sox the World Series trophy last year. And it's had an effect in our society because we stopped recognizing something that's insidious in our heart, or insidious in our own hearts, which is pride. Most likely, you and I will read the story of James and John, and instead of participating in the ire of the disciples for how dare they, you and I might, on first blush, look at the request from James and John and go, wow, I admire their courage. We call this assertiveness, their capacity to ask Jesus for what they want. These are traits that I raise my boys, my daughter to do, to have, to be confident in the world and to understand, like, you have a voice. You should be able to express your desires. But all of this gets into very tricky territory very quickly, because pride in the scriptures is never associated as a positive trait. It's arrogance. It's an overinflated sense of self-importance. And it's always associated with the way of the devil. Did you know this? It's the ultimate sin that Satan himself committed. If you have time this week, Isaiah chapter 14 is your chapter for this. It is a polemic against the way that Satan tried to approach his life with God pre-creation. I just read you a couple of verses. It shows the moment that Satan fell from heaven. It says, you said in your heart, you being the devil, you said in your heart, notice all of this language here, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne. You hear the James and John request right there? I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphron. I will ascend to the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. And of course, when the devil tempted Adam and Eve in the garden, the first temptation was this exact temptation, to become like God. He appealed to human pride. I don't have this on a slide, but I want you to think about this the rest of your life. That there is no more ordinary curse in this world than to be inflicted with the arrogance of pride. There is no more ordinary curse in the world than to be inflicted with the arrogance of pride. All of us experience pride. All of us have pride. The religious and the irreligious are prideful. I don't have time to kind of dive into those two topics. That's maybe a topic I'd love to dissect for another day. But I want to notice the elements of pride just in general so that you and I can start to identify them in our own hearts. I think that'd be a really great use of our time today, lest we miss the lesson from James and John's own life. First, I want to show you this. Pride is self-promotion. If you look back at what Satan said, he said, I will climb, I will ascend, I will go up to the heavens. The desire that we have to have accolades and power and highlight our worth to others, to dial up our success, to talk about our how big the struggles are in our life that we've also overcome. You know what I mean? Like we're fine putting ourselves down as long as we can tell you how we've risen above the challenges. We promote ourselves. James and John were self-promoting when they asked Jesus for the same thing that Satan asked, to be seated on thrones above the stars of God. How do you use your social media account? How do you use your LinkedIn account? And how do you use your business card? Chances are the things that you're really proud of are contained within those three arenas. Your kids, your job, your money, your connections, your net worth, your network. Like, insidiously, we love these things. These are fine things. These are not immoral things, but we often find our pride wrapped up in these things. Do you find yourself struggling with self-promotion? I had a pastor friend once point out that pride exists every time you take down a social media post because it didn't perform well enough. And I was cut to the heart because I thought that was just being clean or being clear. It's a sense of pride that I'm only going to put what succeeds. The second thing that we see here is that pride is self-centered. The most prominent word in Isaiah 14 is the word I. I will ascend. I will raise my throne. I will sit. I will make myself. It's hard for us to spot pride in our own hearts because we can't always hear the words that we're saying out of our mouths. We struggle to know how our heart is expressing itself through the words that we speak. People who speak about themselves and are self-centered, I think, just betray their pride. And at the risk of violating this principle, let me tell you about myself and how I struggle with this. The irony is so rich. It's so amazing. This week, I started using an AI note taker for all of my meetings. The revolution is over, guys. AI is here. We lost. And this thing just like it sits on a device and it records notes and it listens to me and it listens to other people. It takes action items. It's really easy to use, and I just find it to be helpful in the season of work. And for years now, I have thought about how I show up to work meetings, how I sit in a conference room, how it is that my presence is experienced. I started out as a gung-ho son of thunder myself, and I would dominate conversations with people twice my age in boardrooms because I was right, I had the ideas, I was cutting edge, and you were old. That was my heart. I had to learn how to not do that, think that, or be that. And over the past 15 years, I've made incremental progress. But I've had lots of thoughts about this. I want to show up in a room where I ask good questions. Leaders ask really good questions. I want to show up in a room where I'm patient. I want to show up in a room where I'm kind and I'm not always dominating the conversation. My first day with this AI note taker, it showed me a progress bar for how much time in the meeting I had spent talking. And it was almost always over 50%. And there were like 8 people in the meeting. And I was like, oh gosh, how do I turn that feature off? Like, Forrest, this is a bad feature. Like, just get rid of the feature is what I said. That was my first thought, was like, it's gotta be wrong. It analyzed my tone. That was fun for me to hear my progress in life completely out the drain. It also showed me what I talked about. And if I wanted to, I could go back all the times and highlight the times I used the word I. I felt in that moment, after one time having a mirror in my life reflect back to me how I show up to others, that 20 years of attention, detail, prayer, thoughtfulness, consulting with leaders and guides and coaches was all wasted. Because I could see objectively how I was doing. And the point is simple. If you would ask me before I started that meeting, Dan, how proud are you going to be in this meeting? I would have been like, dude, this meeting is about nothing that I care about, zero pride. And yet, pride just follows us wherever we go. In fact, if you're here and you're hearing the pride conversation, truly thinking about somebody else, that is an indication that you yourself need this message. We often find pride in ourselves because other people are struggling with pride, and when other people are proud, we get even more proud. To be human is to struggle with pride. It is self-promoting, and it is self-centered, and ultimately it is self-serving. James and John say in Mark, they say, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." My kids tried this tactic with me once. They were like, "Hey, you got to say yes," like that movie Yes Day. And I was like, "Hey, listen, that was fictitious. Tell me what you want first, and then I'll say yes." What I love about Jesus, knowing the hearts of humanity, is he's not surprised by their request. He doesn't say, "Well, tell me what it is first, and I'll let you know." He just says, "Well, what do you want?" And I think it's because they came to him as a teacher, and Jesus knew he was about to school them in the most important lesson of their lives. They said, "Let us be at your right hand and your left." It's pretty on the nose. "Jesus, we've given you so much. Give us something in return. We've followed, now reward us. We've proven ourselves, now promote us. We've learned, now let us lead." Like, we're ready. We're hungry. We'll help. We'll win. And this is where Jesus surgically exposes their overinflated sense of pride. First, I love that he doesn't say to them in response, "How arrogant are you?" No. He goes one step deeper with a sharper scalpel. He says, "How ignorant are you?" Look at this. He says, "You don't know what you are asking. Can you drink the cup I'm going to drink?" This was a question that Jesus asked to put them on the hook for something that they had no comprehension about. I don't know if Jesus consciously realized, if I ask this question, the disciples who are going to write down this conversation for the benefit of everyone who comes after my resurrection are going to hear what I was talking about and to see the human pride. I don't know if that's what Jesus was thinking about. But he at least wants to let them know, you're out of your depths on this one. They say, "Yeah, we can." In other parts of the Bible, this is called zeal without understanding. You don't know what you are asking for. And our arrogance is almost always what blinds us to our ignorance. Our pride often gets in the way of our lack of knowledge. Our assumptions keep us from asking good questions and instead demanding action from God. And oftentimes, because you and I are arrogant and ignorant, welcome to church, glad you're here. Because you guys are arrogant and ignorant, me too, we often command God to do our bidding instead of ask God what he'd like us to do. And this is a prideful posture lived out in real life by James and John. And Jesus asks if they can drink his cup. They think he's talking about just the burden of leading a country, and they say, "Yeah, we're up for that," or like waging a cultural war over the Romans. They have no idea that Jesus is talking about suffering and death, his messianic act on behalf of all humanity, that he would suffer as God in place of humanity to pay for the sinful deeds and wicked hearts of humanity that God himself loves. James and John, can you accomplish the redemption of souls? Is what Jesus is asking. And they say, "Yeah, we got that." Jesus doesn't condemn them. That is its own lesson. Instead, he ominously warns them. He says, "You indeed will drink from my cup." Meaning you will share in my sufferings. You will experience the pain of following me. You will participate in parts of your life that will end with utter humiliation. The book of Acts, chapter 12, records for us the moment that James, who becomes the head of the church in Jerusalem after Jesus is raised from the dead, gets into a fight with Herod, the ruler. And Herod, realizing that it's garnering him political favor with the people, the Jewish people and the Romans, he decides to behead James. James becomes first in one thing in this life, and it's he's the first person of the disciples to die for Jesus. Indeed, James, you will drink this cup. John does not die a young man. John eventually grows old, very old. In fact, so old that when he writes his revelation, people write it off as the diary of a madman who's gone too crazy. He lives many, many decades But in those decades, he experiences tremendous amounts of suffering. One Christian tradition understands that John was dipped into boiling oil to kill him, and he survived. That's one legend about John. The truth is somewhere out there, I'm not entirely sure, but we know that he did not have an easy life. Jesus says to them, "You will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right hand or my left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father." When the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the two brothers. Jesus called them together, and he said, listen. He said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them." That means those who oversee the Romans and even those who are out in different countries who rule over their people. They do so with an iron fist, with a way that they expect to be appreciated and valued and thanked and applauded and genuflected to when they walk into a room. They lord over their authority. They insist on being called different titles so that you remember that you are lower than they and they are higher than you. They're high officials. They exercise their thumb. They kind of put their thumb upon others. This is how the world leads. This is how people still lead today, is with an insistence on an admiration for the position that you hold. Jesus says, "Not so with you. For my followers, whoever wants to be great must become a servant. And whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served." Say this with me, 3 words. "But to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." This kingdom that Jesus is bringing about is so inverted, so upside down. At the end of the day, pride believes that not just is God great or is Jesus great, but also that I'm great. And Jesus taps into this perennial desire that we all have to be great, and he writes the script on how to be great. He describes politics. He says the leaders are going to fixate on all of their power. But if you want to be great in God's eyes, resist lifting yourself up and instead give all you are to champion the needs of others. The world's greatness is found in a ladder. Jesus' greatness is found in a cross. The ultimate symbol of suffering and shame and service. That he would give himself for the sake of others. Jesus had everything to be proud in. Had everything. We wouldn't call it arrogance, we would call it divinity. We would call it perfection. We would call it immaculate. And yet, he didn't claim any of these privileges for himself. He made his life about the lives of others. And that's why every Sunday, we make our life about him. That's why every day, here at our church, we say we make him first. Is because Jesus is truly the greatest of all time. Take that, Michael Jordan, Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, all of it. Amen. The greatest is the one who actually gave up his lives for others. Jesus makes it very clear. Greatness comes on the heels of service and sacrifice. Even as I wrote that sentence, I couldn't help but thinking about the generation of our country here in America who served in World War I, World War II. We call them the greatest generation. It's because they served our country and they sacrificed for the sake of their children. It's very admirable. We get what this looks like. But to do this on a daily basis takes a lot of courage and faith. Courage and faith that Jesus is actually telling us that this is the way to go forward in the world. And if this is true, then you and I have a lot of self-correction to do. A lot of self-surrender to do, a lot of self-awareness to grow in, a lot of others-focusedness to have. Because greatness is not about our position. Greatness is always about a posture. James and John wanted the position, but Jesus says the people who are going to be truly great don't care about the position. They're just going to have a posture. The greatest human in the history of humanity took the posture of a servant. And I learned this from one of the people who oversaw me in these years that I have been growing up in ministry. I once served with a guy who was a pastor by the name of Terry. Terry had done his doctoral studies in servant leadership. And the summation of all of his work, all of his studies, was hanging on the wall right by his door as you walked into his office. Terry had won major awards. He had won athletic accomplishments. He had a lot to be proud of. But as you walked in his office, there was a picture that was drawn by his 4-year-old of Jesus washing someone's feet. And it's a type of picture, John, where like you look at it and you have to ask him like, what's going on in this picture? You know what I mean? And he'd tell you, he'd go, well, that's Jesus washing the feet of the disciples. You stare at it and you go, yeah, you really love your kids, Terry, because that doesn't look like that to me at all. And I would look at that picture as I walked in because underneath it, he had professionally inscribed this phrase. Even though he was on his knees, everyone knew he was the leader. Even though he was on his knees, everyone in the room knew he was their leader. Because this is the way of humility. This is the way of Jesus. The way of Jesus is to serve others. See, pride has a lot of fears. What will happen if I don't achieve, I don't win, I don't excel? And Jesus says, well, what will happen if you do? What good is it to gain the whole world, he said in another place, and forfeit your soul? Instead, he says the way for us to move forward in life is to look out for the needs of others. And this is ultimately what James and John do. They experience Jesus' death on the cross. Their mother puts him in the grave. She's there the day when he is not in the grave. They see him with their own 2 eyes, and they touch him with their hands, and they eat fish with him on the seashore. And then James goes off back to Jerusalem, back where his family knows the high priest, back to the town where he ultimately thought Jesus would rule and reign in a political sense. And he's a part of the spiritual movement of God called the church. And he spends his days, if you know his story, Acts chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, you know all the stuff that we talk about in Acts chapter 2? We did a whole series called Church 101. James was leading the cause where they were distributing money as anyone had need. They were looking out for the needs of the widows. They were taking care of the poor. James made sure that the early church had an others outward focus and didn't lord it over them at all. In fact, the fact that I'm telling you that James did all of this, you're kind of like, wait, where does it say this? It doesn't. That's how selfless he had become. John, if you read any of his epistles, 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, he's the apostle of love. Gone are the days of the sons of thunder. Jesus has come and given him a new heart, a new posture. Why? Because something had happened in the sacrifice and service of Jesus that changed their mind about greatness. And I want to invite us all into it right here, right now. We're going to, in a moment, take communion where we remember Jesus. Jesus saw us in our desperate state, and so he came down to us. He didn't lord his divinity over humanity, but he enjoined himself with us. He stooped down to serve us, not just by washing our feet, but by washing our sins. The best thing that ever happened in my life is something that I didn't accomplish. I didn't win. Someone else won for me. Someone else took my place, and I'm so glad he did. It's Jesus. Communion is a time where we remember the fact that Jesus has come to seek and to save that which was lost. He came to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And in all the ways in which we would have pride in our hearts, a pride that says this is nice for other people, we get a chance right now to renounce that pride and say, this is meant for me. Thank you, Jesus, that your amazing grace has saved a wretch like me. When you're ready, our band's going to sing, and you can come forward and take the bread and take the blood. If there's one thing we brag about in this life, it's that we know the one who has saved us. This is the boast that we make. Christ died for me. So let me just pray over this space right here for your hearts, for your lives, for the positions that we aspire to and the positions that we currently hold, that we would fulfill our callings in this world with a posture of servants. Father, you've given us all that we need to live this life with godliness. Forgive us for the times when we confuse following you with some sort of political agenda. Forgive us for a spirit of pride that can sometimes come out of the church when you want your church to be people who are serving others selflessly, letting you win the day, but following after your lead. God, for those who lead businesses and lead companies and lead families and are just in places of authority, thank you for putting us where you've put us, where you want us. Help us not to let our hearts get trapped in the successful ladder. Instead, God, help us to fight our way down to what you call us to be, servants, people who sacrifice. And Father, as we do this, would you help our hearts be glorying in your glory? Help our hearts be content in your success. Father, build your church. Thanks for using us at all. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Hey, we love you so much. Thanks for being with us. So next week, Brad's going to be kicking off another segment of our series called Ordinary, and it's about a follower of Jesus who had some real deep questions. You don't want to miss that, whether you're here or online. Make sure you come back next week. Also, if you're here and you're like, got nothing to do at 11 o'clock, a brand new course is kicking off in the hub called Navigate, and I'm sure I'm not screwing up any prepared plans by just inviting you right now. I'm sure that'll be fine. Just show up, just hang out, get some coffee, and then it's an unbelievable course. It's a brand new thing we're starting. We'd love for you to attend. Hey, we'll see you guys next week.